Welcome to part 2 in this series of videos where I'll be creating a birthday reminders application using Blazor server. It's my intention that the application will be eventually published as a web application, and therefore we'll need some form of identity management to provide a method for users to register for and log into the application. We will also need a method to verify users' email addresses. Azure Active Directory B2C seems to be the answer to this particular problem. For my purposes, it shouldn't cost anything and will remove a lot of the hard work that one would need to expend in creating your own identity management system. Before I move on, you might be wondering why we're going to be setting up the Azure B2C before we actually get round to doing anything in Visual Studio. And the reason for that is relatively straightforward. You can add Azure B2C into an existing Blazor C# Visual Studio application, but if we set up the Azure B2C first, when we create the Blazor application in Visual Studio, the template, if we select the right options, the template will already be set up and pre-configured for using Azure B2C. So it's easier if we set up Azure B2C first. But what is Microsoft Azure B2C? So I'll just recap briefly. It's an identity management hosted by Microsoft in Azure. It's a login system that allows users to sign up to your application using their email addresses, and only their email addresses in our case. Their email address will be verified by sending them a verification code to the email address that they've set up, and they will then have to enter the verification code to verify that their email address is correct. Once set up, the users will be able to set and reset their passwords if they forget it or if they just feel they need to change it. And why Microsoft Azure B2C? Well, for a start, it saves an awful lot of coding. That's a very good starting point. The other thing is that it moves responsibility for data protection from you to Microsoft. So user emails and other information that we may collect, such as their name and passwords, are stored by Microsoft. Therefore, data protection responsibility is moved to Microsoft. And the other thing is that it's free for up to 50,000 users. That's even beyond the 12-month free trial. So it's always free for up to 50,000 users. And I don't anticipate that we'll be anywhere near 50,000 users. Azure, however, it can be very intimidating to new users. Therefore, I'll try to lead us through the system as simply as we can. I had originally thought of calling this episode the 39 step to creating an Azure B2C account. It's not quite that complicated, but it can seem pretty complicated at times. So the first thing we need to do is to sign up for an Azure 12-month free trial if you haven't already got an Azure account. We'll then create an Azure resource group, then create the Azure Active Directory B2C, add an app registration, and then create a user flow. And then lastly, amend the user flow to allow the users to reset their passwords. I'll explain all these things in a little more detail as we go through. So the first thing is to sign up for an Azure 12-month free trial. Open a browser and a search engine such as Google and search for Azure free trial. And that will take you to a page where you can sign in. For a free trial, you need to have a Microsoft or GitHub account. I have an Outlook account and use that to create my Azure account. You'll see that you get 12 months of certain services free. $200 of credit for use within the first 30 days, and access to some always free services. At the time of writing, one of the 12 months free services is 250 gigabytes of SQL database. So to start the free trial, click on the Start Free button here and follow the instructions. I've already got an account, so I can't really do this. But as part of the sign-up procedure, as well as a Microsoft account, you'll be asked to provide a telephone number for verification. I had a text message with a verification code and a valid debit or credit card. To keep the Azure account live after the first 30 days, you'll have to upgrade to a pay-as-you-go account. You'll therefore need to be very wary about using services that could be costly. As an example, one of the free for 12-month services is 250 gigabytes of Azure SQL database. And it then describes it as standard SO instance with 10 database transaction units. This specifically refers to one database, not a server with a number of databases whose size is less than 250 gigabytes. So my word of caution here is be careful. You should be able to get away with a free account, but make sure you don't sign up for anything by mistake. Right, let's have a look at the next task. The next task is to create an Azure resource group. A resource group is a way of collecting Azure services and programs together. I'm going to use a separate resource group for this project, simply because if anything goes wrong, I can just delete the whole resource group and that will delete everything associated with it. So log into your Azure portal. This should be the screen that greets you once you've logged into your Azure account. The items across the top may be in a different sequence, and as you can see, it can be potentially confusing. We've got Azure AD B2C, we've got Azure Active Directory, and we've got B2C tenants. But what I hope to do is to lead us through this without too much pain. So the first thing we need to do is create a resource group. I could either click here and then click Create, but if this doesn't appear in here, you can click Create a Resource, and if you put in Resource Group, we can then select it from the menu. And once we get to this page, we click Create. The subscription will either be your free, it'll probably say free trial, or if you've converted it to a pay-as-you-go, it'll have a description here. In resource group, it needs a name, so I'm just going to call it Birthday Reminders, and I'm going to add RG at the end for resource group, and then the region. I'm in the UK, so I'm going to choose Europe, UK South. Click Review and Create. All looks fine to me, so Create. And it's now been created. Back to our checklist, and we can see that the next thing we need to do is create an Azure Active Directory B2C tenant. So swap back to the Azure portal. At this time, we're going to click Create a Resource and type in here B2C. And we should see there Azure Active Directory. Select that item. And you'll see here that down at the bottom here, we can get 50,000 monthly active users, but for multi-factor authentication, that activity is billed separately and not included in the free tier. So we mustn't set it up for multi-factor authentication. So click Create and click Create an new Azure AD B2C tenant. It asks for the organization name. This is used as part of the B2C directory name, so I'm just going to call it birthday reminders. And the initial domain name, sorry, that's the wrong way around. I'm going to copy that and paste it in here. And the organization name, I'm just going to call Blazor Code. And I already have that in another directory. Let's call that Blazor birthday reminders then. The country and region, again, I'll set to the UK. The subscription will default to the one that we've got, or it could say free tier, and the resource group I'm going to have as birthday reminders RG. So I'm going to review and create this. And everything looks okay, so we'll click create. Creation in progress, and it'll take a few minutes. Right, that's finished, and the new tenant has been created, and we get a message here saying Microsoft would love our feedback. But under here, we can see tenant creation was successful. Click here to navigate to your new tenant, Blazor Code UK. If I click that, you'll see that it opens up a new tab here and logs me into it. Now, I got terribly confused by this the first time round, and you'll see here that says Blazor Code UK. Going back to this one, which is where we were originally, that says default directory. So I'm now going to go back to the Blazor Code UK, which was the name of the organization I used. And what I found terribly confusing was that for the rest of the setup, you have to make sure you're in this Blazor Code UK rather than the default directory. If you get confused, this icon here says directories and subscriptions, and that will allow you to switch backwards and forwards between the various directories we've got. So that's worth remembering. So let me go back to where I was. Okay, so that's got the Azure Active Directory B2C tenant set up. So let's go back to our checklist again. So we've created the Azure Active Directory B2C. So the next thing to do is to add an app registration. Let's have a look at that. Back to the Azure portal. So in the Azure portal, I'm back on the Blazor Code, and the first thing it suggests is register an app. So I'm going to click on app registrations here. I could click on that as an alternative. And click new registration up at the top. And we have to give it a name. I'm just going to call it Birthday Reminders app. We've got to leave this on this third item, accounts in any identity provider or organization directory. I've left the redirect URI blank, and that is ticked the permissions, grant admin consent to OpenID and offline access permission. Once all that's done, click register. And that will create the register. Oh, sorry, the application. And the next thing we need to do is to create a user flow. I should go back to our checklist. and we'll see the next item is to create a user flow. So back to the Azure portal. This is where we left it, and from here we've got some information here which we'll come back to later on when we've created our application in Visual Studio, but we need to add a user flow. So first of all, we've got to make sure we're in the correct blade, so the correct directory. And if we click on the home button and then select Azure AD B2C, and we're back to this item here, and we can then see user flows down here. I got a little bit confused as to how I got back to this, having done the app registration, and that seemed to be the easiest way. From here, click User Flows and click New User Flow up at the top here. And we'll get various types. The one we want is sign up and sign in. So if you click that, some more options appear at the bottom. Select recommended and then click create. It needs a name, so I'm just going to stick with birthday reminders. And under identity providers, click email sign up. The multi-factor authentication doesn't really apply, so leave that as email for the type of method for verifying the email, and enforcement is off. Now at the bottom here, we can leave conditional access blank, but click show more down at the bottom and we get items that we can collect when the user signs in and will be returned to our application once they've signed in. So the ones I have chosen are display name, email address, and for the return claim email addresses, given name, i.e. first name, surname, and I'm not sure if I need it, but I also ticked user's object ID. So the display, if as an example, the given name in my case may be Christopher, my surname is Bell, but my display name might be just Chris or Chris Bell or something like that. It's whatever the user wants it to be. So click OK on that and click create, and that will create the user flow. Done. Back to our checklist. And the last thing we need to do is just amend the user flow to allow the user to reset their passwords. In user flows, I haven't moved from this, so we can select it from here. Select the user flow here, and then select properties. And down at the bottom, we have self-service password reset. Tick that and save. And that's changed that successfully. So that completes our task checklist for setting up an Azure B2C. That concludes this video. I am enormously indebted to a YouTube video I found by Michael Washington. I'll put the link in the description below. He covers what I've covered in about 7 minutes. So if you want the shorter version, have a look at Michael Washington's description of how to create a B2C. It goes beyond what I've got here, and it was a very, very helpful YouTube for me to watch. So thank you very much for watching this, and I hope to have the next video coming along shortly. Thank you very much.